Well, I appreciate it very much. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with your group today for this virtual global big data conference, right? And the world certainly has changed. And the way that we interact with each other, certainly through conferences like this, I've seen a big upswing in more of these virtual events versus the ones that we've done in person in the past. So thank you for leading on that and for, allowing me to speak today. And as you mentioned, the MPSA, that's the Managed Print Service Association. My second term as president. It is a not-for-profit group that is built to, what do they say? Rising tides raise all ships, to make sure that the channel that's serving the customer market can be as influential and as vibrant, as it can be, right? And of course, I'm not here to speak on that today, as you did mention that I'm an early adopter of AI. And that's one of the things that we're going to be working through today is ChatGPT and other natural language processing engines and what they're doing and how they're changing the way that we work every single day. So thank you very much for tuning in to ChatGPT More Than Just a Machine. My contact details are here. You can see that my email is wolverine@tigerpod.com. And as you can see from the chops, I do get a little bit of the MPS Wolverine as a reference, oftentimes in the marketplace. My phone number and my LinkedIn connections are there as well. And certainly everyone's free to join the AI Explorers group. It is on LinkedIn. It's a great place to meet with other people that are interested in what is probably the fastest changing technology realm that any of us have experienced. I've heard some people say since the iPhone. I would go back further. I would say it's probably the biggest innovation that we've seen in technology since the original prompt, which you can remember when you were using DOS. So this is a really big deal, and we'll move through what some of that looks like today. And I will pause my image as we're going through this, just so that we can actually focus on the slides itself. So, one of the things that you're seeing here is that the World Wide Web was one of the biggest things that happened, and obviously Google dominated that eventually, but it was this ability for us to actually gather and gain information outside of a library or outside of a direct resource, right? And that was huge. So what we've really done with AI is we're moving away from the information age. And I know this is a bit controversial, but we're moving away from the information age into the age of intelligence. And what that really means is now that instead of just having the capability to search, that we're going to have intelligence being able to do thing for us in those search capabilities. And it goes far beyond just information. This is probably one of my favorite slides, the one that I'll show next. And we're going to go through some numbers games here, right? And typically when I'm at a live conference, I'll ask for a show of hands if people understand what some of these numbers are. And that first one is really important to show you just how transformative this technology is going to be in all of our lives. So that 100 million number that you see there, that actually speaks to the number of subscribers for OpenAI's ChatGPT in less than 8 weeks of its release. So to give you some perspective on that, because obviously we live in a world where there are billions of people, not just millions of people, but it is a faster adoption rate than Facebook, a faster adoption rate than TikTok, which was probably the second fastest adopted technology behind this. Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, you name it. So any of these other web-based applications. So it's officially kind of the fastest growing application in the history of applications. And that's, pretty important. The 570 gigs that you see there, this is an interesting number. I'll just get a little geeky on this because that's the size of the data set that it was actually trained on. And so when you look at GPT, what that stands for is Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And the pre-trained is the information that it was actually trained on initially. And the entire history of the internet, basically up until about September of 2021. So you can see the 2021 number down there, lower on the slide. That was until recently kind of its threshold for what it knew. So if you asked it anything sort of beyond September 2021, it didn't really have an answer. But 570 gigs is not a lot of storage space, right? I think everyone can appreciate that on your laptop at home, probably you have a 1 terabyte, hard drive on that. And odds are today probably a solid state drive, right? So, that's literally, much smaller than just a hard drive on your laptop. So there's probably some kind of compression that's used to be able to get all of that data in there, because that other number that you see, the 300 billion, that's the number of transformer points. And remember, we said that GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformer. Well, those transformer points are basically data points that it's learning from. And that's the knowledge base that it was working from in its training, right? So 300 billion data points and 570 gigs. I'd have to argue that there could be some compression in there. I'm not an expert on that, but just looking at the numbers, I would think it's true. The other number that you see there below the 570 gigs, the $20, that is the number if you are actually going to pay for ChatGPT Plus. I personally use it because it does give you early access to the 4.0 version of ChatGPT versus the free version, which is only 3.5. And it's not just a small, incremental difference in the capabilities of the systems. It's astronomical. Some have said, and I doubt it's true, but that it's working at 5 times the number of data points or transformer points that 3.5 is, right? So absolutely, a huge number there. And so 100 trillion transformer points. I'm not sure if that's true. I know that OpenAI did tell people to expect to be a little disappointed. Unless you're a power user of the system, you won't necessarily understand all of its capabilities, but they're profound. I was speaking with someone today that said in ChatGPT now, you can actually insert links from the World Wide Web to get it to actually research those web pages to further its knowledge set. And that would be brand new as of the last few days, right? So absolutely incredible how quickly things are changing. Why is this important? Well, when you think of the technology world, I was actually involved in the birth of the internet for business, right? That my first sales job, I was actually working for a company called PSINet. And a friend of mine told me about this crazy company that was actually going to be doing this, stuff called the internet. And I had no idea what that was. And, when they told me that it was, well, basically go online, you'll have some ability to do email and communicate in other ways than just using your phone. And they have this new revolutionary technology called a web page, and it would be a static web page, where you would put the information on one page. And, that to me at that time seemed crazy, right? That people weren't going to be using the yellow pages or picking up the phone to talk to people. Well, look where we are today. Google dominated the search space, and OpenAI now is a contender for that, right? That what they're doing with Microsoft and others in the space is absolutely profound. And we're going to see some huge changes in the power dynamics of how we access, and as I mentioned earlier, how we use information, right? So moving away from just this idea of search and the information age into this era of intelligence, which is going to help us do great things. A good friend of mine who works as a senior executive at HP, she's also an educator. And I love this quote that she shared with us. She said, I understand that AI is a slippery slope to welcome into the classroom as an educator, and we could replace that with classroom. It could be business. It could be anything, right? But she says, I find it far more dangerous to reject it or pretend it doesn't exist. A responsible use of AI tools is an emerging skill set that our students, and I would insert our customers and our workers, must have, or risk being outperformed by those that do. I did hear another quote recently from someone that said, you don't have to be afraid of AI taking your job. You have to be afraid of somebody who knows how to use AI taking your job, right? So we can't sort of put our head in the sand and kind of ignore this, hoping that it will go away, because it certainly won't. This next one is kind of fun because what she actually did, she sent me this. She put her original quote through ChatGPT and asked it to update it. And so it says, as both a tech executive and adjunct professor, I recognize the competing viewpoints surrounding the use of AI in education. While some believe that bringing AI into the classroom is a precarious path, I contend that ignoring its existence could be even more dangerous. And the reason she shared this with me is because she felt it was a much better quote than the original one that she had put in the first place. And That's one of the uses that when I'm training people or speaking with people about generative AI, because I'm also a user of it, an early adopter, a creative that does use it in my writing efforts and my research efforts, that this ability to take original content that you wrote and to put it through ChatGPT or other similar engines like Bing now, which you can do as well, to be able to improve the output, to correct it for grammar or spelling, or to come up with some nuanced differences in the ideas that it's sharing, right? So again, senior, VP at Hewlett Packard, HP on the printer side, just a phenomenal way of showcasing how important this is going to be for all of us. Well, how does it work? And, the thing is, and before the call, we were actually, before the presentation, I should say, we were talking a little bit about different kinds of AI. And there's certainly a lot of different kinds, right? That there are versions of AI that work with big data, that do data analysis. The type of AI that we're talking about today is not the only kind, but the big difference is that it's probabilistic, right? And when you think of a probabilistic model, I'm just going to share with you how that works. I'm going to say that AI is the biggest innovation since, and I'm deliberately quiet there for a moment because you probably had a word that popped into your mind, right? Since what? Since the birth of the internet, since the iPhone, etc. And that's how the human brain works, is that it's guessing what the next word is going to be based on the words that preceded it, right? That's how we as humans work, and that's how this model works as well. It's probabilistic, so it's not always going to have the same response. Some of you were thinking a different answer than others, on the call, and this is how this particular type of AI works, right? That it's looking at what the next most likely word is going to be after a series of words. And this is what makes it so close to the way that humans actually communicate, and why that it feels kind of eerily, like we're actually speaking to a person versus a machine, right? And just keep that in mind, that if you actually have two, and I actually encourage you to try this, if you have two windows of ChatGPT open and you put in exactly the same prompt and you look at the responses in both the windows, they're going to be different. Now, what's really interesting about this exercise is that even though the responses themselves are different, the truth or the data of what you asked for is the same. And hopefully that makes sense. In other words, the way that it presents it would be very similar to if you asked me a question on ChatGPT and other forms of natural language processing intelligence versus another expert. You might get obviously two different responses, but the core of what we're be telling you would be the same. So deterministic models, on the other hand, are looking for very specific things out of the data set. In other words, when you ask a question, if you're doing big data analytics, no matter who asks the question of that, the answer is going to be the same, right? That it's using its algorithms to find that one piece of data that is exactly the same, that is exactly true. So they're very different, approaches to how we actually use information and data. One of the things that comes up all the time is, how do I use this, right? So again, as I mentioned, I'm an early adopter. I'm someone that actually uses this in my workflows. And what I'm going to share with you is some of the ways that you can use them very simply. And there are other ways that you can use it as well. One of the things that I love to use NLPs for is outlines. And so I actually have a podcast series, which I host every Wednesday. And I have a variety of guests that are working in different fields that I know nothing about. All right. So I'll give you an example. I'd be speaking with somebody in cyber security. Well, I don't do cybersecurity, but I would like to know perhaps what the cybersecurity industry looks like, what some of the leading things that are changing it are, right? What zero trust policies are, and how passwords are becoming passé because of two-factor authentication, et cetera. And so I can actually create an outline for a blog that I'm going to write on that topic using something like ChatGPT, because it has access to, remember again, over 3 billion transformer points on the low end, if you're using 3.5, and potentially trillions of transformer points if you're looking at 4.0. So it has a much larger access to a database of knowledge than I could ever hope to have. So for creating outlines, it's wonderful because it has access to all of that information, right? SEO is one thing that we always talk about in the marketing world, search engine optimization. It's an interesting one, actually, because this is going to change dramatically in the next year as well, right? So if search becomes less important, if really it becomes about intelligence, going through that information, how is that going to change? But at least for today, it's a great way to go through and make sure that you can actually SEO optimize the content that you're writing, put your original content in, ask it to actually do some SEO optimization based on some keywords that are trending for a particular topic, right? And you can use Bing for that, which is what I typically recommend because it is live and on the web. But if what people are saying is true and ChatGPT now allows you to put in links, it should get better and better at looking at the most current keywords, which you can then use to optimize the content that you're writing. One article that I read, a company was seeing the results dramatically go from like a 49th position in web search ranking based on just human writing to when it was augmented, and I do like to say augmented, not written, because we're still doing some of the heavy lifting, augmented by artificial intelligence, it went as high as 14. And that's a huge difference. Anyone in the marketing world will tell you how much time it takes to prepare content to be able to do that. So you can do it instantaneously using tools like ChatGPT. Titles are another great one, and this is something I'm actually particularly bad at myself, which is I love to write. I do like to produce content, but those SEO-friendly titles are very difficult sometimes to actually develop and manage. And you can actually use ChatGPT and other engines to be able to help you generate those titles and to give you options for those titles that are more SEO optimized. So, very good. One of my favorite ways to use it is actually an email help, right? And I'm going to show you a slide after this, which will give you some idea of what I'm talking about, just how it can be used for helping with email creation. But the truth is, most people that are using email are not writers. They are not people that have been trained to write, and yet we expect them, if they're in sales or in other areas, to be able to communicate effectively with prospects, et cetera, through email. Well, email in ChatGPT to be able to give it a voice and a tone, depending on the buyer persona that we're trying to reach, is absolutely profound. And interview questions, earlier that one of the things that I talked about was when I'm interviewing guests and verticals that I don't understand, it's a great way to come up with a baseline of questions to interview experts in fields that you may not be familiar with, right? So think of it as an assistant, as a way to help you in a much shorter time become much more familiar and comfortable with some of the topics that you may have to deal with, either for prospects that you're working with, customers that you're dealing with on a regular basis, or maybe even processes for things that you're helping your customers with that are novel or new to you, right? So really good way to do that. Of course, there is a dark side to this kind of power, right? And one of the things that I would say is that, at least today, one of the things that I recommend people don't do is hand over their blog writing or their content writing 100% over to AI, right? And there's a few reasons for that, right? And I did put, at least without full disclosure, because there are articles that I've written in which I'll have it reword a certain paragraph or help me with a section, and I will reference simply just in brackets with the help of ChatGPT, right? So just to let people know that it was somehow involved in what was created or worked on. Not everyone feels this way. Some people feel that you should be able to just put it out there as your own. The argument that I've seen used is, look, executives hire ghostwriters all the time to write for them, right? Human beings. And they still, put their name to that blog, even though that they didn't write it. So it is a contentious area, but my personal feeling, at least at this point, because it is so new and because people are a little nervous about the technology, anything that you do use it for, at least have some kind of disclosure there, right? The other thing is current events, which is very tricky. And I've mentioned this in other presentations, that some of the things that you're going to see are going to be outdated a week after I put them in this presentation, right? So currently, at least, the understanding is that ChatGPT 4 is only current till September 2021. So if you're looking for anything that happened this year, a week ago, a month ago, it's not really that good. Again, if the rumors are true that you can now insert actual web links into the ChatGPT browser, that'll change. And certainly with Bing, it has changed, right? Bing does allow you to look for and search for current events and stuff as well. And you can use either one of those tools. I do prefer for content creation and for idea generation to use the GPT engine because it is faster and it just seems a little more natural in doing that. But if I'm looking for links, if I'm looking for source material, then I will use Bing in another window just to be able to use that, their search capability with AI to be able to save me the time. And that's one of those things when you saw the slide earlier about Google versus OpenAI, there's nothing worse now. The internet is so bloated with information, right? That whenever we put in a search term, we go and the first thing we have to get through is the sponsored posts at the top, and we kind of know that, so we try and blow through those, and then we have an ocean of links that we have to then start to validate and go through to get to the information that we're looking for. Well, certainly this new age of intelligence versus information is changing that, right? The other thing is cheating, obviously, and I just had a phone call earlier with a group, and somebody had sent a chat bot into a meeting. In other words, they weren't there, so they sent a proxy of themselves to be in that meeting, right? And they didn't disclose that. And unfortunately, that is a form of cheating, right? So if we have to write something that's actually going to be graded or that we're getting paid for, etc., that we can cheat, and we can do that before ChatGPT ever existed. And certainly this just makes it a lot easier. And deception, you can see there down there, that's going to be something we have to watch out for. There was a time when, say, for example, email phishing, you could tell that an email came from someone else because maybe they didn't have a perfect grasp of your native tongue, right? So if you live in Denmark and someone's doing a weird translation, you might catch that. Or if you're in India and someone's trying to send you something in your local dialect, you may notice that it's not, the way that it should be, right? Well, that's going to get a lot harder to notice now with engines like ChatGPT, right? It does a phenomenal job of writing in the tone and not just the language that you ask it to write in, but also in a local dialect or tone or voice, etc. So that's something that we have to be careful of and really watch out for, is deception on this front now. And as I've mentioned, source links, you have to be very careful. And quite frankly, it's not that they make them up. We do talk about generative AI having hallucinations. And oftentimes the source links, people have said that they're fake. Well, oftentimes they're just dead. In other words, ChatGPT has no way to know that a link from 2009 doesn't work anymore, right? That, the link doesn't work because it just literally grabs that from the data set that it's been trained on. So you got to be very careful there. All right. The power of prompts. And so one of the things that I'll say is that oftentimes, especially when it first came out in late 2022, a lot of folks were saying that, they didn't like ChatGPT for writing or help because it was soulless, right? The writing didn't have a soul. And what we've since learned is no, actually, it actually can write whatever you want, right? And I've often said this to people about when you're ordering product as a wholesaler from China, say, for example, right? Some people would say that, Chinese product is inferior. And I would argue that's not the case. One of my favorite smartwatches is the Huawei, which I have. It's phenomenal. I've had 2 of their phones, top-notch technologies, right? What happens is that you can order what you want. If you want low quality, you can do that. If you want high quality, you can also do that and pay for that. And ChatGPT is kind of the same. If you put in a prompt, which is very low level and not really asking for good information, guess what? That's what you're going to get back. However, as you start to layer and work on your prompts, you can get much better at how you actually get information from the system. So one thing I encourage everyone to do is layer prompts, right? Think when you're putting a prompt into place that you're not just asking it, I'll give you an example. Someone might say, write me a blog about artificial intelligence. Well, right away, I can tell you that what it's going to produce is going to be poor, because it's like, well, what kind of artificial intelligence? I'd probably want to put in the prompt to make it a little stronger. I'd probably want to say generative AI or natural language processing intelligence, right? Because now it's going to narrow down at least the type of AI that I'm looking for. The second thing that I might do in that prompt, the second layer that I may put into it, is the ability to write it in a voice of someone who could be my audience. So I'll say in a lighthearted, cheerful tone, right? Versus an academic tone or whatever. It depends on who I'm writing for. And once I've done that and I see the output that comes out, then maybe I want to go back and actually layer that prompt even further. Maybe I didn't like the output that came out. It was too long. I could say, you know what? I like where this is going, but could you shorten it? And also, instead of having a paragraph for every point that you reference, maybe put it in as a bullet point in a shorter reference, and it will do that, right? So that's one of the things I really encourage you to do is don't just type in a simple prompt and think it's not working, that you can layer those prompts. You can really get a lot more out of them when you do that. So just to give an example of what happens when we do that, I actually took a quote about ChatGPT being soulless and not having any energy in its response, and I asked it to rewrite it in the voice of Hunter S. Thompson. For those that aren't familiar with Hunter S. Thompson, he was a notorious figure, really funny in the way that he talked, and this grabbed its language perfectly, right? So listen up, friends. ChatGPT's got a wild card up its sleeve. This language model doesn't play by the rules of determination. No, sir. It's a betting man, always putting its chips on the odds of what the next word will be. And he spent a lot of time in Las Vegas, so it's interesting that it grabbed that and used it, right? So just an example of how you can actually completely change the voice. And ridiculous examples aside, this could be writing for a medical practice, right? That you could say, please write in the tone that a doctor would be responsive to. This could be written for somebody that's in manufacturing, somebody that's in the manufacturing industry for the automobile sector, right? That you can actually layer those prompts to be able to help change the tone of what you want it to do. And yes, code, right? Code is a language. So I asked it to take that same quote and actually put it into binary code. So this binary code that you're looking at on the screen now is produced by ChatGPT. You can then use an ASCII2 format or conversion to be able to convert it back to English. And I've done that and it works perfectly, right? One other thing to look at, and we were talking about responses, and for emails, right, that I mentioned earlier that people are not necessarily all, very good at writing. None of us are good at everything, right? So we can't expect people to be great at writing. I deliberately wrote this quote that you see in yellow to be a very poorly written sentence with instructions before it, right? To please edit the following paragraph, edit for grammar, spelling, and tone, and in brackets, I put more upbeat and personal. And you can also add a few sentences if you want. And so I put in them's good marketing's people, talking with them. There's even a spelling mistake. You should, if your business is impotent. Don't forget to email me if more info. I think we can all agree that's a horrible sentence. And unfortunately, oftentimes we get a lot of those emails, which are rife with spelling mistakes or incomplete thoughts, or they, et cetera. So here's the response that it gave me afterwards. Hey there, I just wanted to let you know about some great marketing folks. If your business is important to you, then you should definitely talk to them. They're knowledgeable and can help you take care of business to the next level. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you need more information. And just as a friendly reminder, don't forget to email me if you need anything else. Looking forward to hearing from you. What a profound difference in that text for that email, right? But of course, one of the things that we can't do is just talk about all the good things that AI has. It does have an ugly side. And we mentioned that earlier about how this could impact phishing campaigns and security in the future. And I can't wait to look back on this a year from now, because it's developing so quickly, to see both what those challenges are and how we respond to them, right? But one of them is legal. So those transformer points we talked about, those 3 billion points, were taken from the internet. And if you look at engines that actually do image generation, like DALL-E 2, and now Bing has an integration in their images section for what they call Create, that it's drawing that information from those 3 billion transformer points. And a lot of those are artist work that are on the web. So the question legally now that people are asking is, how can you use that training data, right? And this is not complete yet. This fight's still going on. It's brand new. How are you allowed to use information from training? Do you have to give credit to the artists who you took that information from, or other people, et cetera, right? And so that is certainly a battle that's going to be ongoing. The other problem that we have with it is bias, right? And some of that bias is actually deliberately built into the systems. And some of it's not. Unfortunately, when we talk about those 3 billion transformer points, well, guess what? they're from human beings, right, on the internet, where there's a lot of misinformation, where there's a lot of different opinions about what's right or wrong. They could be politically motivated. Some of it could be hate, some of it could be sexist, etc. That's what it's learning from. So it's going to have bias because we have bias, right? The information that it's being trained on has bias. And then further, it's going to use that bias based on what it's trying not to let you to do, right? I think most of us would agree, hopefully all of us would agree, that learning how to build a bomb on using ChatGPT is probably not the best use of our time. Well, they're putting gates in to make sure you can't even do that, right? So that is a type of bias, even though it's for protection, even though it's for helping us, it's still a bias, right? And those are things that are being built into it. There was some controversy a few weeks ago about requests on right-wing politics in the United States and how it would not produce the content, although it would for more liberal-based, sort of content, right? So these kinds of things are going on. There is bias, and we have to be aware of that. So as you're using the tool sets, just be aware that some of the things that you may be looking for might be biased, and just have an open eye about that, for how you can deal with it. The other thing is lying, right? That it does have a tendency to hallucinate. That when you think of how natural language processing engines work and ChatGPT, it's called a black box technology, which means that beyond how it was constructed in the first place, we know how the outside of the box was built, right? If you ask someone at OpenAI to tell you how they built the box, they could tell you, like for sure they could tell you. What they can't tell you is what's happening inside the box. So there's a lot of mystery and magic that happens once it starts to train itself, right? And that although we've pre-trained artificial intelligence, it actually has subroutines and algorithms that it builds itself to further train itself. And we don't know how those work, right? And that's just the honest truth. So yes, we know how the box was built, but the stuff that's going on inside the box, we don't necessarily have a very good grasp on. And so it makes mistakes. Sometimes as it's trying to learn, just as human beings do, it will make mistakes along the way. It will hallucinate. We see that with people all the time. I've personally been guilty of it, where I've shared facts or what I thought were facts with people, only to realize when a friend sent me a link from Snopes or some other fact-checking site that it wasn't true. And so it's not free of that, just as we're not free of that, right? That we have to be cautious of that. Again, it's probabilistic, it's not deterministic. So whenever you're working with probabilities, there's room for error. It's getting better and better, and they're paying attention to it, but nonetheless, it's something to pay attention to. So one of the other things is ethical concerns, right? And I know that Elon Musk was in the news just today, talking about the need to possibly slow down on any generative AI that's being developed beyond sort of ChatGPT-4. And there is some fear around this, right? How will it be used ethically? Are we doing it responsibly, et cetera, right? And Seth Dobrin at the Responsible AI Institute, that's an organization you may want to check out. They're awesome. But as he says, the integration of generative AI on corporate digital assets has the potential to revolutionize communications and marketing, but it requires attention to AI safety for responsible and ethical use to help avoid harm to the company and stakeholders. And it'll be interesting to look back a year from now to see how this actually goes, right? Because it's not just the ethics of what we use the technology for, but it's also the ethics of who gets access to it. And you got to remember, a company like OpenAI originally started as a not-for-profit, and they've since moved into a limited profit model, right? That they've had $1 billion of investment from Microsoft in the early days. Some argue that it's about $10 billion in more recent investment, right? And that they're now a limited profit company. I myself pay $20 a month for the Plus version, which means I get a better product. I get access to a better product than somebody that's using the free version, right? So is that ethical for something that's going to so dramatically change how we work and live? Is that okay? And I really don't think we necessarily have the answer to that yet. Of course, there's so much more to learn and so much more to discuss. As I've mentioned, I'm actually an early adopter of the technology. I use it in my own workflows. And we've actually got a group called AI Explorers on LinkedIn. You can find it there, groups. The group is 141-951-22. And we also do virtual meetups for those that are interested in doing Zoom calls on a weekly basis to talk about, new and exciting things that are impacting artificial intelligence as a particular for, GPT models or generative AI models, right? I can't thank you all enough for joining me today. Hopefully I've given you a few things to think about, some insights, some things to think about as you go down your journey with how you incorporate, ChatGPT and other NLP models into your workflows. And so to the Global Big Data Conference and everyone there for allowing me to speak today as well, thank you very much.